Day in Northern California. This quiet farming community is about to be transformed. Hollister is a shrine for America's bikers. Every year, tens of thousands of Harley-Davidsons converge on the town for the Independence Day rally.
16 Robert 1069 is silver, slick, and he's got a silver helmet. Ocean King Lincoln 4. They're both red, they're both Arizona.
A retired California police officer, John Schlimm, is a veteran investigator of motorcycle gangs. For the next 3 days, he'll be monitoring who's in town.
Well, the top hatters are already here, and there'll be a noticeable presence, of course. The skeleton crew, there's 3 different chapters of henchmen now. They'll show up. Ghost Mountain Riders out of Santa Cruz County will be here. Ancient Iron out of Santa Clara County will be here. But the Hells Angels are going to be the most notable to show up. Oh, hi, this is Slim. Hey, listen, we're following a pack of angels going out 25 towards 101.
How many about?
There's probably about, 30 bikes.
California is the Hells Angels' heartland, with 21 separate groups or chapters. The Hollister Bike Rally is home turf.
Hi, this is Slim again. Hey, for what it's worth, that's the Richmond boys, and they're stopped at a Chevron station up here on Bolsa Road now at 101.
The Richmond chapter, like all Hells Angels, make no bones about who they are. Their trademark is the winged death's head patch on their backs.
15 Paul 5764 is a really fresh, bright patch, full patch. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There's 10 members and prospects, and there's another 2, 4, 5 slickbacks riding with them.
The police are out in force in Hollister. With so many Hells Angels already in town, they're scanning the crowds for any of the rival biker gangs.
We should not see Banditos, Amigos, Hermanos, Pagan, Sons of Silence. We shouldn't see Mongols, even though there's Mongols that actually live here in Hollister. None of those people should show up here. If they do, that, of course, would be a red flag and something we'd be very interested in as law enforcement, because it's, those people are all pretty much opposed to each other at this stage.
It's the Mongols who present the biggest potential threat in Hollister. They have unfinished business with the Hells Angels. Originally a mainly Latino biker gang from Los Angeles, the Mongols have expanded throughout California. In April 2002, 400 Hells Angels attended the Laughlin River Run, another huge annual biker rally held 100 miles south of Las Vegas. They checked into the Flamingo Hotel. The Mongols also arrived in force. The 2 gangs engaged in a tense standoff. Even a huge show of force by the local police couldn't prevent confrontation.
Shortly after midnight, a pack of Hells Angels drove to the Harris Hotel, where they knew the Mongols to be staying. The Hells Angels were observed leaving other parts of the Strip to go there, and they were followed by a large law enforcement presence, but that didn't seem to matter to them. They parked their motorcycles, left the keys in the ignition, and strode immediately into the casino floor around the vicinity of the bar where the Mongols were.
What followed has been described as the worst violence in Las Vegas casino history. The Hells Angels and Mongols fought with knives, hammers, and guns inside the packed casino. Within minutes, 2 Hells Angels and a Mongol were dead, and 9 gang members injured.
My God, how committed to violence do you have to be to come to a public casino, arguably one of the most heavily surveilled places on the face of the earth, and go at it with one another with guns and knives? How committed to violence do you have to be?
Good job yesterday, guys.
Thanks.
You wired?
You bet. Don't say anything to me.
Schlimm and his colleagues hit the streets to mingle with the biker hordes.
Snakelady.com. Be interesting to see what she's got on her website.
Away from the gangs, the Hollister Rally is a festival of petrol fumes and chrome, a chance for bike enthusiasts to show off their customized Harleys and parade their Independence Day patriotism. The small town of Hollister has a big place in the history of the American biker.
To this day, it has become the place where bikers really sort of were birthed, you know. You think back to Hollister and you think that's where it began.
In 1947, the very first motorcycle gangs, formed mainly of young men returning from the war, gate-crashed a speedway tournament in Hollister.
Motorcycles were racing up and down the street. There was public drunkenness, certainly. There was reports of a certain amount of behavior that wasn't probably didn't put bikers in the best light at the time.
A famous photograph, later discovered to have been staged, began a wave of hysteria, which made the biker into a bogeyman.
That picture went into Life magazine, and everyone went, "Oh, hide your children, hide your daughters, you know, the outlaw bikers are coming."
A hoodlum group whose members pose a threat to all of California. Hell's Angels, accused of rape and perversion, theft, narcotics, and violence.
The Hells Angels were formed in 1948 in San Bernardino, California. The name was borrowed from Second World War U.S. Air Force squadrons, and they soon became the most notorious gang of all.
They have selected as their targets for some of their activities small communities in California, places like Porterville, Willits, Hollister, where they go in and they know when they first arrive they outnumber the local police force.
Hollywood, too, had been quick to seize on the Hollister incident. To middle-class America, Marlon Brando and his biker gang were every parent's nightmare. But for American youth, the motorbike became a symbol of rebellion. With the Wild One, Hollywood had created a new myth, the outlaw biker.
What did I tell you what that means? BRMC. What does it mean?
Black Rebels Motorcycle Club.
Isn't that cute? Hey, Johnny, what are you rebelling against?
What do you got?
15 Zebra 205H is Moloch's Coast. We've got 3 chapters of Black Sheep that I'm aware of that are outlaws.
In the 50 years since the Wild One, Marlon Brando's Black Rebel Motorcycle Club has spawned many imitators.
I've got something better than 4,000 clubs. I mean, they're just, the names are as bizarre as they can be. I looked at a new club I'd never seen before called the Loose Nuts. Well, why do they name themselves the Loose Nuts? I mean, what?
In spite of the tough guy image, most of the clubs are just weekend hobbies, as easy to join as the Round Table. But not the Hells Angels. From the beginning, they considered themselves a breed apart.
The lowest rank is you and me, citizen, a non-Hells Angel. The next rank above a citizen would be a hang-around. They don't wear any insignia of the Hells Angels, but they're allowed to attend functions. The next status is that of a prospect member. The prospect member would wear a bottom rocker, which would give either their country or state within a country. For example, a California prospect member would wear a California bottom rocker. To become a full member of the Hells Angels, the prospect has to have displayed that they have honor within the context of the Hells Angels, physical bravery, and no small amount of intelligence, and upon receiving a unanimous vote is accepted into the Hells Angels. Upon becoming a full member, they would receive the top rocker, which says Hells Angels, and the winged death's head, which sits in between the top and bottom rocker.
Like a form of biker franchise, Hells Angels chapters sprang up across the United States, from California to New England. And it wasn't long before the winged death's head went international. The London chapter is the oldest in Britain, granted its charter by the Californian Angels in 1969. Since then, the club has expanded steadily. There are now 16 chapters across the country. They follow the same strict rules and protocols as their American brothers, and they'll defend with violence the honor of the Hells Angels patch.
Hells Angels, they call themselves. They're known to others as the Grease. If you're not one of them, you aren't likely to have much time for them. Certainly they seem to have no time for anyone but themselves. In the way they run their gangs, in their slang and dress, they follow the American pattern like slaves.
They might have had the trappings of Hells Angels, but many of the gangs that sprang up in the 70s had no official permission to wear the colours. Anyone with long hair and a motorcycle seemed to be calling themselves a Hells Angel. The brand was being seriously diluted, and the Hells Angels organisation was about to flex its muscles.
A chapter started up in Windsor by some local rockers, but they never applied for an official charter. To actually be a full member of the Hells Angels, you have to apply to the headquarters in California and get permission to actually have the official colours and so on. Other people in Windsor never did that. And not only that, they also had another Hells Angel taboo by having one of their members being black.
It was a state of affairs that could not be allowed to continue. On Easter Sunday 1979, the unofficial Windsor chapter was partying in the New Forest. One man was hit by a shotgun blast, and Windsor president Richard Sharman was shot 3 times, the third bullet bouncing off his skull. Both men survived, but the Hells Angels had shown how far they were prepared to go to enforce their rules. Each Hells Angels chapter around the world is officially autonomous. But for years, the Oakland chapter across the bay from San Francisco effectively dominated the organization, creating rules and granting charters to new groups. The Hells Angels have no national or international leaders, but for decades the founder of the Oakland chapter has been the highest profile and best known Hells Angel in the world.
If you say Sonny Barger, you think Hells Angels. If you say Hells Angel, you think Sonny Barger. It's a synonymous kind of a thing. He brought it together, and I think he does get the credit for holding it together.
The son of an Oakland construction worker, Sonny Barger founded the third Hells Angels chapter in 1957.
He quickly became the very heart and soul of the Hells Angels. He led by example. He's a very charismatic individual, very intelligent, and he literally put his personal stamp on what the Hells Angels were then and are now.
Barger's personal stamp was distinctive. It meant violence. In 1965, he led his Hells Angels in an attack on students protesting against the Vietnam War. Barger was also learning about public relations. After the violence, he called a press conference to offer the Hells Angels support in the war against the Viet Cong.
Dear Mr. President, on behalf of myself and my associates, I volunteer a group of loyal Americans for behind-the-line duty in Vietnam. We feel that a crack group of trained guerrillas could demoralize the Viet Cong and advance the cause of freedom. We are available for training and duty immediately. Sincerely, Ralph Barger, Hells Angels.
Behind Barger's public declarations of patriotism, his Hells Angels were changing. By the 1970s, they were no longer just a gang of California wild men.
The Hells Angels had evolved from a group of independent individuals, some of whom were involved in crime, many of whom were not, into a group that began to derive the vast bulk of its revenue from criminal activities.
No matter how you cut it, they've always been involved in drugs. It's a quick, relatively safe way of making money. Prostitution has always been a big-time moneymaker. Gambling, extortion, murder for hire, arsons, you name the crime, they've done it.
But proving it was another thing. The FBI launched several failed attempts to crack the Hells Angels using laws designed to take on the mafia. Barger, in spite of his own criminal record, including violent assaults and heroin possession, claimed the club was the subject of a witch hunt.
We're mostly a bunch of happy-go-lucky guys trying to make it in this world, you know. When the police say these guys are killers, these guys are dope fiends, these guys are dope dealers, this and that, it's probably not too hard for the public to believe because they see us standing out from the rest of the population. But as far as any truth to it, I say there's no truth to it.
With their tight-knit structure and strict rules, the Hells Angels have always been difficult to penetrate. In Hollister, the police arrest individual angels for minor infringements like concealed weapons. But to find out what the gang is really about, you need someone on the inside. The greatest breakthrough came in the unlikely form of Anthony Tate. A member of the Hells Angels chapter in Anchorage, Alaska, Tate looked more like an accountant than an outlaw. But in 1985, he became a paid informant for the FBI. His handler was Special Agent Timothy McKinley.
I decided that the most efficient and effective way to use him was to turn him into a walking electronic recording platform so that he could take us into the inner workings of the Hells Angels at their upper levels of management, and also so that he could fully explore the criminality of the Hells Angels on a chapter-by-chapter basis.
Tate rose through the organization, becoming a senior officer for the whole of the west coast of America. He was soon perfectly placed to infiltrate Sonny Barger's Oakland chapter, the most powerful in the world. The FBI believed that Oakland members were at the center of a huge drug network led by Kenny Owen, a Hells Angel legend renowned for making the most potent methamphetamine in the country. It was known as Oakland rocket fuel.
Mr. Tate approached Mr. Owen and simply asked, could he purchase an LB, short an abbreviation for a pound. Mr. Owen immediately went and got him a pound of methamphetamine. Quite tellingly, Mr. Owen told Mr. Tate that the purchase price would be the Oakland member price, $10,000 a pound. Mr. Tate then went and purchased a second pound and was provided a third pound on credit.
As Owen sold Tate the drugs, federal agents were recording the deals. When the time came for the bust, the FBI could not believe the scale of Owen's operation.
And there in a bedroom converted into an office, they found approximately $1 million in cash on the floor and a bank currency counting machine chewing through a stack of $100 bills. Additionally, some 29 pounds of 100% pure methamphetamine were recovered from a locker in the basement. At two other locations, a very high-tech methamphetamine laboratory was located. At a minimum, a metric ton, 2,200 pounds, of precursor chemicals necessary for the manufacture of methamphetamine. The street value of that methamphetamine was somewhere in the range of $160 million.
As well as Owen, Tate's evidence eventually convicted more than 30 Hells Angels for drug dealing and conspiracy. The Hells Angels are not the only biker gang involved in drug dealing. The Outlaws, formed in Chicago in 1959, have a history of trafficking drugs and guns across America. Like the Hells Angels, the Outlaws have a fearsome reputation for violence. The two clubs have a history of bitter and bloody turf wars. As Sergeant-at-Arms of his chapter, Tony Tate was tasked with taking revenge against the Outlaws after a Hells Angel was gunned down in Louisville, Kentucky. The plan was to carry out a major hit against the Outlaws, and Tate set about obtaining weapons from Hells Angels chapters across America. Every deal was monitored by the FBI.
Tate was able to buy a fully automatic Sten gun. He was able to purchase silenced weapons. He was able to purchase multi-pound quantities of both C4 dynamite and the civilian version of a plastic explosive from members throughout the United States. He also negotiated for the purchase of a Laws rocket, light anti-tank weapon rocket.
Several years earlier, Sonny Barger had been hospitalized for throat cancer, but he was still a powerful figure in the organization. The FBI wanted to know whether he would take part in a plan to blow up an outlaw's clubhouse.
Tate went to Mr. Barger and showed Mr. Barger a photograph of the outlaws clubhouse in Chicago and demonstrated where he was going to put the explosive charges to collapse the building on Halloween during a party, and with any luck, quote, kill 5 or 6 people, end quote. Barger's response was, "That's good, that's great. You be sure to call me when it's done."
Crucially, Barger agreed to provide Anthony Tate with an alibi for the killings. Barger arranged for fellow Hells Angel Irish O'Farrell to make it look like Tate was staying in a hotel in Oakland while he carried out the bombing in Chicago.
I asked Irish if he would take his wife, go to this motel, this Hyatt Motel Hotel, and have dinner, spend the night, you know, and it was all on Tate that he was paying the bill, have a nice time, and mess up the bed and make it appear that Anthony stayed there. And that's what I got 5 years for.
This was an alibi? For Tate to do what?
Well, he was supposed to go back to Chicago and do something.
Barger went to prison for 5 years. In spite of their history of violence and drug dealing, the Hells Angels are happy to advertise their presence at biker rallies.
That's a little compound the Angels have erected. Beyond that fence is where they'll keep their t-shirt vending booth, their motorcycles, their pickup trucks, their trailers. And of course, they'll have their guards, their prospects and hang-arounds posted, making sure the place stays secure.
As well as the Hells Angels, gang investigators pay close attention to other clubs. The Ancient Iron from Santa Clara County are well known to the police.
They're a support club for the Hells Angels. See how the one guy's got California on the back? The Hells Angels gave him permission to put California on the back. Prospect guy carries a lot of knives with him. He carries like 8 knives. He's from San Jose. He usually has knives underneath each armpit.
Taking over support clubs is one of the main ways the Hells Angels have expanded throughout America.
In the state of Maine, the Angels took a club called the Saracens. In Illinois, they took the Hells Henchmen. A few years ago, they took the Dirty Dozen, which run the state of Arizona. There was, I think, 6 chapters and 90 men, and literally overnight, all 90 of those men became Hells Angels, and the Dirty Dozen became an extinct club.
It's not just America. By incorporating local biker gangs, the Hells Angels now have 235 chapters on 5 continents. There are even Hells Angels in tiny Liechtenstein. It's in Canada where this expansion has had the most devastating results.
The biker wars being waged on the streets of Montreal took another life today. A man was gunned down in a shop.
The gangland-style executions and the bombings began in the summer of 1994.
Car bombs, jail fights, a drug trade worth millions. They're all part of a vicious war being fought in and around Montreal between bikers.
Montreal has a purpose-built fortified courtroom attached to a maximum security prison. Inside, the biggest trials in Canadian history have so far seen dozens of Hells Angels and their associates convicted of murder, drug dealing and gangsterism, the result of a 10-year reign of terror.
Montreal, over a short period of time, we had something like more than 160 deaths, 16 disappearances, 200 attempted murders, over 80 bombs, and 142 arsons.
In the early 1990s, Maurice Boucher became the leader of Montreal's Hells Angels.
Born June 21st, 1953, very poor town, comes into Montreal when he's very young, lives in the east end of town, a very tough French working class neighborhood. He joins the Hells Angels. He's one member among many, but among a gang of tough people, this was one man who was just ruthless, who was willing to go to any lengths to secure power.
The Hells Angels' aim was to take control of Montreal's drug trade, but there was one obstacle: the Rock Machine, a rival gang who refused to submit to the Hells Angels.
The Hells Angels want it all. They prefer to buy you off. They prefer to work out some kind of deal. If not, they'll crush you. And if they have to, they will kill you.
In late 1993, the killing started. Boucher and his Hells Angels set about wiping out the Rock Machine. For 18 months, bikers and drug dealers bombed and shot each other. But one event was to turn this local gang war into a national crisis. On the morning of August the 9th, 1995, 11-year-old Daniel Desrochers was walking outside his primary school in the east end of Montreal.
At 11:45, I suddenly felt sick. My hands were shaking. My boss said, "You should go home, you're as white as a sheet."
At 12:40, across the road from Daniel, a small-time drug dealer called Marc Dubé was approaching a black Jeep. Dubé had connections to the Rock Machine.
Just after noon, a 26-year-old man died from injuries he received in the blast. An 11-year-old neighborhood boy was also critically injured. Daniel Desrochers happened to be walking on the other side of the road when the bomb went off. A piece of flying debris hit him in the head.
I didn't know where the hospital was, but I listened to the radio because they were talking about it. I arrived at the hospital and started looking for Daniel. I found him on a stretcher, completely naked, shivering. I saw my other son and my partner at the time crying, and the doctors told me that Daniel had suffered very serious injuries. They operated straight away, but 4 days later, he died.
Daniel Desrochers' death provoked a wave of public outrage. His mother launched a public battle to force the authorities in Montreal to take on the Hells Angels.
They stole my son's life. They broke my heart. I was horrified that these people were walking free without anything being done about it. That's what made me want to rise up against it.
In spite of the protests, the biker war intensified. Bombings and shootings shook Montreal as the Hells Angels and the Rock Machine battled for control of the streets. The escalating violence finally forced the authorities into action.
There was a strike force assembled of every police forces in Montreal, and then the government put a lot of money in the investigation, and it led up to a kind of cleanup of the city. There were many arrests.
For the first time, the heat was on Hells Angels leader Maurice "Mom" Boucher. Many criminals might have decided to keep a low profile in the face of such public pressure.
Where he thought he was, you couldn't touch him. And he even decided that Rock Machine was not enough. Police was starting to put a lot of pressure, so we'll go after the justice system.
What they decided to do was to start by killing prison guards. And the horrific nature of this murder is that it was random. Diane Levine had the bad luck of pulling out at the time when the killers had staked out the prison. The two killers are in a motorcycle. They pull up beside her and they see the patch. They know she's a guard. And they fire. A mother of two dead.
Within 3 months, a second prison guard, Pierre Rondeau, had been gunned down. It was a direct challenge to the Canadian state. Police arrested hitman Stéphane Gagné for the killings. He named Maurice Boucher as the man who gave the order to kill the prison guards. The Hells Angels leader went on trial for murder. During the 2-week case, the judge decided that the evidence of the informant, Gagné, was unreliable. In 1998, Boucher walked free.
Mom Boucher walked out of that courtroom like a crime prince of the city. People are applauding. That night, there's a big boxing fight in town. Sort of a buzz in the crowd, and people start applauding. And it's Mom Boucher walking in with his entourage.
When you see some people give him a standing ovation, you wonder they're looking for heroes like Mom Boucher's, or are we so badly in need of heroes that we have to look at Mom Boucher? And that's the question we ask at the time.
For the weekend bikers in Hollister, the Hells Angels are just a fact of life.
I've never had a problem with them. I've been to a lot of motorcycle rallies, and you know, they're a presence. That's, you know, that's a given. I've never been in a situation with those people where I felt my life was in danger. They have their own lifestyle and we have ours, and I think that's what makes this country great.
You know, it's very obvious to me that these people are gangsters. They're motivated by greed, by money, and violence is one way of getting it. And that's so obvious to me. It's confounding to me to think that there are people in this society who don't understand that.
On the streets of Hollister, it seems that the Hells Angels are winning the argument. The glamour of the outlaw image just seems irresistible. Here you can buy Hells Angels caps, badges and t-shirts to pledge your support for the red and white. Hells Angels supporters can also contribute to a legal defense fund for club members facing trial. Hells Angels merchandising is more than just a weekend pastime. The name and symbols are trademarks registered to the Hells Angels Corporation. It's a worldwide business, appealing to those who like to dabble with the danger of the outlaw lifestyle. After all, what bad boy barbecue would be complete without a garnish of Sonny Barger's Hellfire Salsa? Writers and journalists, too, have always been fascinated by the violence of the Hells Angels. Hunter Thompson's 1966 bestseller elevated the Angels to worldwide fame. And the Angels loved it. Hollywood's love affair with the rebel bikers also continued. 13 years after The Wild One, cult movie director Roger Corman hired the Hells Angels to appear with Peter Fonda in a low-budget movie called The Wild Angels.
Not children of God, but Hells Angels!
Just what is it that you want to do?
We want to be free to ride, and we want to be free to ride our machines without being hassled by the man.
The Wild Angels was a surprise hit, packing out drive-in movie theaters across America. But the success brought its own problems for the director. The Hells Angels were furious at someone else cashing in on their name. They decided to sue Roger Corman.
First I heard of it was on television, where the television announcer was reading the details of the lawsuit, and he started laughing in the middle of it. And he said the Hells Angels have sued Roger Corman on the basis that he has portrayed them as an outlaw motorcycle gang, whereas in reality they are a social club dedicated to the spreading of technical information about motorcycles. Their leader called me and said they were going to snuff me out. And I said, Otto, think about this. Consider this carefully. If you kill me, you cannot collect $5 million from me. My advice to you is forget the momentary pleasure of killing me and sue me for the $5 million. And he thought a while and he said, yeah, that makes sense. That's right. Okay, we're just going to sue you. So I'm still alive.
Day in Northern California. This quiet farming community is about to be transformed. Hollister is a shrine for America's bikers. Every year, tens of thousands of Harley-Davidsons converge on the town for the Independence Day rally.
16 Robert 1069 is silver, slick, and he's got a silver helmet. Ocean King Lincoln 4. They're both red, they're both Arizona.
A retired California police officer, John Schlimm, is a veteran investigator of motorcycle gangs. For the next 3 days, he'll be monitoring who's in town.
Well, the top headers are already here, and there'll be a noticeable presence, of course. The skeleton crew, there's 3 different chapters of henchmen now. They'll show up. Ghost Mountain Riders out of Santa Cruz County will be here. Ancient Iron out of Santa Clara County will be here. But the Hells Angels are going to be the most notable to show up. Oh, hi, this is Slim. Hey, listen, we're following a pack of angels going out 25 towards 101. How many about? There's probably about, 30 bikes.
California is the Hells Angels' heartland, with 21 separate groups or chapters. The Hollister Bike Rally is home turf.
Hi, this is Slim again. Hey, for what it's worth, that's the Richmond boys, and they're stopped at a Chevron station up here on Bolsa Road now at 101.
The Richmond chapter, like all Hells Angels, make no bones about who they are. Their trademark is the winged death's head patch on their backs.
15 Paul 5764 is a really fresh, bright patch, full patch. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There's 10 members and prospects, and there's another 2, 4, 5 slickbacks riding with them.
The police are out in force in Hollister. With so many Hells Angels already in town, they're scanning the crowds for any of the rival biker gangs.
We should not see Bandidos, Amigos, Hermanos, Pagan Sons of Silence. We shouldn't see Mongols, even though there's Mongols that actually live here in Hollister. None of those people should show up here. If they do, that, of course, would be a red flag and something we'd be very interested in as law enforcement, because it's, those people are all pretty much opposed to each other at this stage.
The Hells Angels police the Bulldog Bash themselves and do a very good job. The other people that they invite, the bikers and the other gangs, are all there by invitation, and they know better than to cause trouble at the bash, because it would just mean months and months of trouble to follow from the Angels themselves. So it's a very quiet, peaceful event.
Britain's 200 or so Hells Angels have a much lower profile than their Canadian or American counterparts, but they have a history of violent clashes with rival gangs. In Britain, criminal groups are monitored by the National Criminal Intelligence Service. Their leading expert on biker gangs can't be identified for operational reasons. In the late 90s, a feud developed between the Hells Angels and a group called the Outcasts.
The Outcasts originally in the United Kingdom had chapters that were London-based. There were 2 or 3 chapters in London. There was also one in Norfolk, based in Great Yarmouth. They started to expand.
There was a very small gang in Hertfordshire called the Lost Tribe, and the Outcasts started making moves towards making the Lost Tribe members of the Outcasts. If that had happened, there would have actually been more Outcasts in the country than there are Hells Angels.
The Hells Angels took exception to that. The Outcasts were more or less told, you knuckle under, prospect for Hells Angels or we'll close you down. Some of them did go over and become prospect Hells Angels. Some of them didn't. That culminated in the incident in 1998 at Battersea.
Well, it's a Saturday night at the old dance hall.
Battersea Arts Centre in South London was the venue of the annual Rockers Reunion, a usually peaceful get-together for ageing rockers and teddy boys. In the world of the biker gangs, This was the outcasts' turf. But that year, Hell's Angels from around the country descended on Battersea. They surrounded the Arts Centre and the outcasts inside. Two outcasts, Malcolm St. Clair and David Armstrong, arrived late. The Hell's Angels set upon them with hammers, axes and knives.
Two people literally hacked to death in the street, one of whom was dragged from a motorbike and cut about with machetes, various weapons, died on the steps of Lavender Hill Police Station. Those murders were witnessed by about a group of 200 people who, when interviewed by the police, saw nothing.
The police investigation was fraught with difficulty in that a lot of witnesses refused to come forward first of all. When some eventually did, they managed to charge two of the Hells Angels with murder. But on the day they were due to go to trial, the charges were dropped because the witnesses all pulled out and decided they didn't want to go ahead.
Only one Hells Angel was convicted of any crime at Battersea. Ronald Waite of the Essex chapter was jailed for conspiracy to cause grievous bodily harm. The outcasts buried their dead with full biker honours. The funerals saw gang members and their allies from around the country roll into East London. And it wasn't long before there were rumours of revenge.
There were various incidents that happened that were never reported to the police. There was certainly an improvised explosive device found at a Hells Angels clubhouse. There was also an attempt made to firebomb a garage motorcycle business owned by the Hells Angels, again, never reported by them. I'd anticipated that was going to be the start of a major conflict. I think it was probably in the interests of both gangs for that war not to happen. The publicity and the police attention that a gang war attracts is not in the interest of any of the gangs.
The danger of a gang war was real enough. A year before the Battersea murders, Scandinavia had been gripped by a brutal conflict involving the Hells Angels and another rival biker gang, the Bandidos.
The war started over drug trafficking in Copenhagen. The Hells Angels initially were controlling most of the city, and the Bandidos came in and wanted to take over and start selling their own drugs. Started off with a few minor attacks on rival gangs and simply escalated because there was so much money being made. There were machine guns used. There were rocket launchers used. Anti-tank weapons were used. And it almost became like full-scale warfare.
In the space of 3 years, there were 11 murders and 73 attempted murders. The situation became so serious that ministers from 4 Scandinavian countries met to launch a joint crackdown on the biker gangs. In the face of threats to ban both groups outright, the Hells Angels and the Bandidos came to an arrangement.
The two gangs called a truce and were seen shaking hands and agreeing that there would be no more killing and no more deaths. But in fact, what had happened was that they'd actually agreed to split drug trafficking, and that the Hells Angels would control central Copenhagen and the Bandidos would control it in the outer.
Stay in Northern California. This quiet farming community is about to be transformed. Hollister is a shrine for America's bikers. Every year, tens of thousands of Harley-Davidsons converge on the town for the Independence Day rally.
16 Robert 1069 is silver, slick, and he's got a silver helmet. Ocean King Lincoln 4. They're both red, they're both Arizona.
A retired California police officer, John Schlimm, is a veteran investigator of motorcycle gangs. For the next 3 days, he'll be monitoring who's in town.
Well, the top headers are already here, and there'll be a noticeable presence, of course. The skeleton crew, there's 3 different chapters of henchmen now. They'll show up. Ghost Mountain Riders out of Santa Cruz County will be here. Ancient Iron out of Santa Clara County will be here. But the Hells Angels are going to be the most notable to show up.
Hi, this is Slim. Hey, listen, we're following a pack of angels going out 25 towards 101.
How many about?
There's probably about, 30 bikes.
California is the Hells Angels' heartland, with 21 separate groups or chapters. The Hollister Bike Rally is home turf.
Hi, this is Slim again. Hey, for what it's worth, that's the Richmond boys, and they're stopped at a Chevron station up here on Bolsa Road now at 101.
The Richmond chapter, like all Hells Angels, make no bones about who they are. Their trademark is the winged death's head patch on their backs.
15 Paul 5764 is a really fresh, bright patch, full patch. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There's 10 members and prospects, and there's another 2, 4, 5 slickbacks riding with them.
The police are out in force in Hollister. With so many Hells Angels already in town, they're scanning the crowds for any of the rival biker gangs.
We should not see Bandidos, Amigos, Hermanos, Pagan Sons of Silence. We shouldn't see Mongols, even though there's Mongols that actually live here in Hollister. None of those people should show up here. If they do, that, of course, would be a red flag.
Guy fired 7 shots. I was hit 6 times, and he fled away.
Michel Auger never stopped telling the truth the way he was, holding no punches and being frank and open. And his heart, you could tell his heart was speaking. And to a point where, I guess, again, the order coming from Maurice Boucher, that this guy had to be taken care of.
The shooting of Michel Auger was the final straw. The people of Montreal had had enough of the Hells Angels. In spring 2001, in the biggest police operation in Canadian history, 2,000 officers raided addresses across the country. Armed with special new laws, police had spent years cultivating informants, tapping phones, and recording every move the Hells Angels made.
It's the whole organization of the Hells Angels who was the target of the police investigation. That's why all those 200 guys are charged jointly.
And in a second trial, the Hells Angels leader, Maurice Boucher, was convicted of killing the 2 prison guards. In spite of the massive crackdown, the Hells Angels have not gone away.
The problem is the police and the government waited too long. They let the sore fester in Quebec so long that by the time they cracked down on the Angels in Quebec, it was too late.
Now we have the Hells Angels in every provinces from Vancouver to Nova Scotia. Their influence is from coast to coast to coast.
In Britain, the Hells Angels are often seen as an eccentric throwback to the past.
Oh, the Hells Angels. This is Snob, as he's known. He's bang in the middle there. And he's the first angel to take part in a royal event, we're told.
A veteran London Hells Angel even led a parade of bikers at the Queen's Golden Jubilee procession.
Anyway, there they go, roaring down. What a terrific sight. Ah, that's better.
But Hells Angels are not a thing of the past. They're expanding. There are now 16 chapters in England and Wales. Like their foreign counterparts, many are believed by police to have criminal connections.
A lot of the criminality that bike gangs in the UK are involved in is invisible crime, and it's not until you start looking for it and digging below the surface that you find it. Hells Angels are very much involved in the drugs dealing scene. Traditionally, their commodities were cannabis and amphetamine, more and more now moving into Class A drugs.
The English Hells Angels refused to be interviewed for this program. They distanced themselves from the brutal criminal activities of their brother angels in Canada, Scandinavia, and America. But the Hells Angels is nothing if not an international organization. The Bulldog Bash attracted club members from across Europe. Denmark, Holland, France and Germany. And police intelligence suggests that the international links between chapters are set in stone.
We'll have, for example, the Hells Angels Kent, that are part of Hells Angels England, which are in turn part of Hells Angels Europe, which are in turn part of Hells Angels World. But eventually they are all answerable to the main chapter in the States.
Every summer, representatives from Hells Angels chapters across the world convene for the annual World Run. The venue alternates between Europe and North America. In 2003, it was Laconia, a boating and holiday resort in New Hampshire. Hells Angels from Windsor to Wales, California to Canada, and Nevada to Norway descended on the town. Law enforcement officers from across North America also arrived. Terry Katz is a veteran gang investigator from the Maryland State Police.
On your right, you'll see people from Canada, Ontario, as well as Manchester, in what we call the Nazwa, which is the area down here that you're looking into. The complex pretty much has been rented primarily by Hells Angels. We've seen people there from New Hampshire, people from North Carolina, and then certainly some of the English Hells Angels were there, some of them from Holland. Even though they're European, the same as if they're from South Africa or Brazil, it doesn't matter. They have to show up.
With up to 700 Hells Angels and their associates in town, Laconia's hotels are doing good business.
This is the landmark. This is the hotel that they rented, lock, stock, and barrel. You see people, members and associates, are parked in there. No one is admitted to that facility except by their direction or instruction.
On the streets and in the bars, Hells Angels from around the world are meeting up. The global reach of the organisation is evident from the patches on show. British representatives include members of the recently formed Wales chapter. There's also a member from Windsor, now a fully paid-up chapter in the Hells Angels Brotherhood. It's a chance to party and drink together, but there's also club business to attend to.
They'll discuss issues that relate to their particular expansions, approval of prospective chapters, rival gangs, law enforcement activities. Anything that might affect the entire entity is going to be the discussion. And then you have the more powerful members meeting other members so that you can transact both legal and illegal business in a secured environment.
The Hells Angels clubhouse in Laconia is ideal for complete privacy.
Right, you'll notice this is a very rural area. It's isolated. The clubhouse will be on your right, down on Fillmore. You'll also notice there's a watchtower, and then they'll have their security preventing access unless you're an invited guest. Everything I've seen or heard clearly indicates to me that Hells Angels worldwide are a criminal organization. There are individual chapters, individual members, but you can't be part of that group and not be able to engage or permit others to engage in criminal activities.
Sonny, can we get a picture with you? Thank you. Yeah, I want to.
Sonny Barger's autobiography, charting the early days of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club, has sold 250,000 copies worldwide.
He's a symbol of freedom, legend of the freedom in the United States. That's what the bikes are, and that's what he's about.
Barger won't comment on the Hells Angels bombing and murder campaigns in Canada or Scandinavia.
He's just a legend of Harley-Davidson motorcycle riders. Thank you, sir.
The guy's been around a long time. I think that shouldn't let us forget that he's committed some horrific crimes his own self in the past. Some he's been prosecuted for, and some he's been punished for, and some he hasn't. The guy is the leader of a pack of gangsters.
Sonny Barger, to me, he is an American legend. He is what freedom and the rebel in us and the heart and soul of what America is about, and that is to do what you want and appreciate what this land is, and that is democracy. That is the freedom of anything, from speech to travel to lifestyle. That's what he stands for. Oh,
Barger was released from prison in 1992. Having served 5 years for conspiring to blow up an outlaw's clubhouse, he moved to Arizona and joined the Cave Creek chapter.
I like being a Hells Angel. I like the fact that I can ride my motorcycle with a group. I like the events we put on. We're having a big party in October for my 65th birthday.
Sonny Barger's next project is a movie about his life story, to be made by Top Gun director Tony Scott. More than 50 years since the first bikers tore up Hollister, the Hells Angels have come a long way. Business is booming, and membership across the world is growing.
The Hells Angels were able to associate themselves with this rebel image and use that as a protective barrier. And the problem is that people in Britain and people in Europe don't realize that there's nothing wrong with owning a Harley. There's nothing wrong with being a member of a bike club. The problem is that the Hells Angels goes beyond that. That the Hells Angels are involved in some of the worst kinds of crime internationally.
Three days after his book signing in Hollister, Sonny Barger returned to Arizona to find that the Cave Creek Clubhouse and 4 others across the state had been raided by the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco and Firearms. It was the result of a 2-year undercover investigation into the Hells Angels.
Undercover agents purchased approximately 101 firearms. That include 5 assault rifles, 9 sawed-off shotguns, 3 machine guns. In addition, they purchased 8 pipe bombs, 43 silencers, illicit prescription drugs, narcotics, which were all tools of the trade in the Hells Angels culture of violence.
Do you think they had a right to do this? Why did they have to pull down the fence? Why did they have to shoot holes through all the windows? We ride motorcycles and have fun. That's what our life's all about. Down to the crossroads.